Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video, we'll be talking about Necrotic Wake and what a rogue can do inside of that dungeon, especially for your weekly mythic pluses, or if you're trying to push the ski in order to make this dungeon far easier. Recently we had the MDIs happen, and while rogues didn't really see a lot of play in variety of the dungeons, they did see quite a lot of play inside of Necrotic Wake. So I wanted to make this guide for any of you guys that are trying to either push keys and you end up getting Necrotic Wake as the key for the week, and you're thinking, you know what, let's push this key for higher rate IO. But even if you're someone who plays the game casually and you want to get your weekly key done on your rogue, and generally you don't look at Necrotic Wake as one of the easier dungeons, even with the recent PvE nerfs to that place, it is still perceived by a variety of players as one of the harder instances. But as a rogue, you can simply make the instance a joke and literally walk through it like it's nothing, with a simple trick that we'll be talking about in this video. What makes Necrotic Wake an interesting dungeon where you can do some cheesy rogue things is because it's filled with all these curing tools. We have a variety of different tools like the Javelin, which most of my group calls the Spear, which will do a ton of damage to the enemy, passing through every single enemy in its path, so it can be used on adds, but it's mostly used on bosses. It also will debuff the enemy, making them take 20% more damage. Using the spear properly can mean very short boss fights. Then we have the Forgotten Hammer. My group calls it the Hammer. You can use the hammer to stun an enemy. Does not work on bosses, but will stun every single add in the game. So using it will do a ton of damage, physical damage, and will stun the enemy for 8 seconds. Can be used to bypass certain powerful enemies that would otherwise wipe your group. Can also be used on bosses because it does a ton of damage. Next we have Discharge Anima. Most people in my group call it the Orb, because when you pick it up and you use it, you radiate with this blue orb of anima, which will do a ton of damage in AoE and will continuously interrupt enemies' casts. This one is really cool because there are some caster enemies inside of Necrotic Wake, especially the adds that get someone for the second boss, and using this around those adds will constantly interrupt them, causing them to run closer to the boss where your group can cleave them. This one is especially cool with this combo. Finally, we have the shield, and I don't really see a lot of groups using the discarded shield at all. When using the shield, you channel this safety area around you where allies near you will take 50% less damage, but the shield stops you from moving and using any abilities. It's almost like it stuns you in place, and I haven't really seen a lot of groups use it. Maybe Blizzard will do something to allow players with the shield to at least move around, or maybe use abilities while using the shield. I think that'll be kind of cool and make it useful, but right now most people avoid that one, so don't worry about this one at all. And while not some of the tools that scatter throughout the dungeon, you can also pick up a Kyrian buff. If somebody in your group is a Kyrian, you can summon a Steward, and when you run the Steward next to these depleted Goliaths scattered throughout the dungeon, I believe there's like 3 of them around here. 2 of them are the ones that most pug groups will end up using. When your Steward reactivates the Goliath, they expel whatever anima is left in them, forming these 5 orbs, one for every member of your group. While holding the orb, which lasts a minute, it radiates arcane damage to enemies and healing to allies. So picking those up if you have a Kyrian combo setup is actually quite good, but also not necessary. But there's a good chance somebody in your group is going to be Kyrian if you are doing this dungeon through LFG. Now the last bit you need in order to make this combo work is a 100% critical strike legendary for your rogue, the Master Assassin. I feel like I've made way too many videos already talking about how insane Master Assassin is, but every single day and every single week I'm proven right more and more as we find out even more broken ways for this legendary. We saw this one in the MDI. Rogues utilizing the Master Assassin because, well, all these tools you find on the ground, the spears, the hammers, and the orbs, all scale with your critical strike. So if the beholder of the item has 100% crit, that means that item, when thrown, used, or exploding around you, will have 100% critical strike chance. There's a reason why most groups that don't run a rogue will give all these tools to their mage, because the mage with combustion, if they're playing fire, which most of them will be, during that crit chance with combustion, all those tools crit. Not only do you bring in incredible damage as a fire mage, but now you also have all these tools that do absolutely absurd amounts of damage. So it ends up being a very strong combo, but it's also just as strong in rogue's hands. What's interesting is, for this trick to work, you don't even need to be Outlaw. Technically, Outlaw is the better Mythic Plus spec, but if you're someone who wants to play Subtlety, and there's quite a lot of you guys that really want to make Subtlety work for dungeons and raids, or maybe you're someone who wants to test out the new buffs that Assassination got and really want to just PvE your favorite playstyles and your favorite specs, I say there's nothing that really should stop you. I think with this trick you can really play any spec of rogue, and I think for the most part you'll be just fine. So let's take a look at where all these items are and how I would end up using them throughout my dungeon run for Necrotic Wake. The first one can be found to the right as soon as you enter the dungeon. It'll be next to this hut, and it'll be the hammer. The hammer can be used on trash adds if, let's say, your group struggles with certain enemies that are constantly casting or are just decimating your tanks, but can also be used on bosses, and definitely should be used on bosses during tyrannical weeks just to make those bosses literally disappear. The first spear of the dungeon will be found down the stairs to your right next to a green pool. That should definitely be used on a boss, even on a fortified week. But also the spear can be used on adds as well if your group lacks the damage to deal with some of the trash adds. And the way that I would use the hammer and the spear on a tyrannical week is out of the opener, queue up the spear, and this footage I decided to get myself slice nice while waiting for the Kyrian buff to come up so I can vanish and have the benefit of the Kyrian buff as well. You vanish into a hammer. So normally you would go for a spear out of the opener, vanish into the hammer right after to make sure both of those abilities crit, and you want to hammer right after the spear to make sure the hammer has extra damage increase from the spear and is 100% crit. Together this combo ended up doing about 40k DPS, decimating the boss, and on Tyrannical Week 14, just putting him to 30% health. We did have the Prideful Add buff as well, so you usually in a pug group would end up picking up the Pride Add. And if you see how much damage we're doing on a 14, you can only imagine how much burst damage that would be on a 10. I mean, the boss would basically be at 10% if you execute this rotation correctly. Shortly after slaying the first boss, your first set of stairs and the first set of the Necromancer pack, way in the back you'll find your first Discharge Anima, otherwise known as the Orb. The Orb does a ton of damage, and the best place I think you could use it is after this first Necromancer pack. Tell your tank to pull as many enemies as they feel comfortable, and all I have to do is use the orb item and then press vanish. While inside of vanish, you'll continuously interrupt enemies, doing a ton of damage to them and having a 100% critical strike chance. This will decimate that trash pack, and you technically don't need to stay vanished the whole time. For the last 4 seconds of that orb, you can come out of stealth and do some damage in order to maximize your damage uptime, but that will just wipe out the trash pack immediately. Then when you're about to cross the bridge, to your right will be the spear and to your left will be the hammer. You can always vanish to grab the hammer because Norzuda is definitely going to aggro to you, and you would generally try to avoid him with our group. Then there's also a hammer shortly after crossing the bridge to your right next to the hut. You already should have a hammer on your rogue already, so you basically are prepped for the boss, and someone else in your group can grab this if the adds are proven to be troublesome. There's also a spear next to the rubble that most people cross. Let your group know not to pick up the spear. You'll need it for the third boss if you want to be able to take him out very quickly. Then we have the second boss room where you can open up on the boss with a spear, and right behind the boss there is a fallen over mech. The mech will have an orb. The orb can be used in order to either deal with the adds upstairs with the third boss room or to deal with the adds that the boss summons. It makes quick work of them, and it just completely stops them from being able to finish their cast, forcing them to get close into the melee range where you can just cleave them off of the boss. It just does a very good job cleaning them up. If you have a vanish for this one, it will be recommended to use vanish there as well, just to maximize the extra damage you can do with the orb. Afterwards, be sure to go back for any of the spears or hammers that are still left over, and be sure to use them on the third boss to also make a very quick work of him. Even with one man down on a 14, we're able to do this guy pretty easily and get him to half health just from the start, also cleaving the hell out of his abomination, which made it that much difficult for us to disrupt his charge. From there, just finish up the rest of the dungeon, kill the final boss, get your percentage, and you're good to go. And it just is a really easy way for you to create extra breathing space for your groups to finish the dungeon and even time it because of all the extra damage that you bring. And there you go. That's the trick for rogues inside of Necrotic Wake in order to be able to decimate through the dungeon and make it extremely easy to do, even if your group is, let's say, lacking on item level, lacking on DPS, or is struggling to get through the content. Very good dungeon if you want to get your weekly caps done, or let's say get your friends through a couple dungeons for the week. And with this trick, hopefully Necrotic Wake becomes one of the easier dungeons for you if you are a rogue player. Just be sure to get yourself the crit legendary. Even the 190 item level is going to make this dungeon basically a joke. As long as your group actually gives you the tools, be sure to let them know, give me all the items. You have to be a loot goblin for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.